So, I have the pleasure to moderate a very interesting, from my point of view, session about what is happened now in Syria. The name is Syria's Future After Assad: Migration, Foreign Policy, and Path to the Stability. That will be, I presume, a very interesting, once again, session, that because here in Romania, it's pretty much a sort of an eccentric topic, because Romania wasn't hit by the migration wave coming from Syria. Actually, Greece, Serbia, Hungary, and after that, Austria, Germany, and Sweden, which were the final destination for a lot of migrants, were those countries. Romania was really eccentric on that. But on the other side, after 2016, Romania took a part of those migrants in our United Nations and International Migration Organization supervised shelters, and some of those people were, I presume, quite well held here in Romania. I have to say that my wife was really involved in the process, and she wrote a sort of a notebook for the teachers, for the Romanian teachers, in order to learn how to teach for the Syrian pupils, which were held in Brăila and in northern part in Maramureș, in the northern part of Romania, because those pupils were bring together with the Romanian pupils inside the school, inside the Romanian school, in order not to feel themselves as foreigner, but to be accepted into the community. So we are going to talk about this topic after a very long war, a very long period, which the pipe of foreigners was broken and somehow was held by the Turkey. Some of those people were subjects of discrimination, and on the other side they were the motivation for a lot of right-wing movements here in Europe, mainly in Germany, as we are looking at the Alternative für Deutschland, or even in Poland, which was not a country which had more migrants or something like that. We have the pleasure on this afternoon to have four keynote speakers, which are very, very much involved in the topic of migration and Syria's topic, and I presume also the topic of the Middle East and Northern Africa, MENA, we are talking about, because these territories are coming to be somehow a very strange land of pretty much insurance. Pretty much nobody knows what is going to happen there and what is happened still now. So we have here Omar Kadıköy. I presume I pronounced okay. If it's okay to Mr. Kadıköy to present himself, he's coming from Heinrich Böll Stiftung, and he is involved on foreign policy, security, and migration program coordination from Istanbul. And after that, we are going to have Bogdan Danilă, which is coming from International Organization Migration from here in Romania, which is an institute and an organization which is supported by United Nations. After that, we are going to have Haldun Yalcinkaya from Bodrum Institute, also from political science, and he is director of this institute, and our colleague Fatma Yilmaz, which is from our school. And after that, we are going to have other people, which are like Claudiu Crăciun or others, which are integrated in our schedule of this afternoon. I assume, and I think we'll gonna have only 1 hour and a half for the entire discussion. Please accommodate yourself in order to keep this 1 hour and a half program. So, Mr. Omar Kadıköy, you have the floor, and after that, we are going to open the entire program from this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be with you, and I feel humbled to be with you as the keynote speaker for this afternoon's webinar. Before I start, I would like to express my gratitude for the National University for Political Studies and Public Administration and the Center for the Study of International Development and Migration for the invitation. And I would like to extend a special thank you to the academic coordinator and Alina for handling the details of the webinar. This being said, as you correctly introduced me, I am the Foreign Policy, Security and Migration Program Coordinator here at the Heinrich Böll Stiftung Turkey office. And I am of a Syrian origin. I've been living in Turkey for the last 10 years. And Professor Haldun is a familiar face. We used to work in the same campus when I was based in Ankara. And it's good to see you once again, Professor. And I would like to say that 8th of December 2024 is a special date for me as a Syrian, as it marked the end of 5 decades of oppression and repression. And at the same time, it is the turning point for a new Syria. It's a very recent event, so I am still walking over the clouds, but the analyst in me is pulling me down to reality. And as such, allow me to share a few of my observations covering the last 5 weeks. The de facto leader of New Syria is the head of a jihadist group, a splinter of Al Qaeda, and the caretaker government in power is a continuation of the Salvation Government, which has been the political governing arm of HTS, running Idlib since 2017. The caretaker government will stay in power until the end of March, when a transitional government will form based on the outcomes of an all-inclusive national dialogue conference, which date has been delayed for several times. And for now, it seems that it will be taking place at the end of February. Now, the caretaker government's plan to hold a national dialogue conference is a necessity for the transitional period and for the transitional government. And it's a reflection of the de facto leader determination to leave behind the faction mentality and, borrowing his words, I quote, to lead Syria with a state building mentality. Yet, I find it strange that he managed to allocate time, a lot of time actually, to making interviews, welcoming officials, and sitting down with social media influencers, while he has not found any time to address the country. Syrians, including myself, are lost between his fluffy promises and the contradicting and opposing policy decisions his cabinet is implementing. The Syrian people deserve to know what is next, because the situation of the country cannot afford misplaced time and efforts, as the challenges ahead are substantial. And I would like to start with the first challenge, which is security. Syria is now a de facto demilitarized country, unable to defend its borders, which was an issue at the time of the old regime for sure, and continues to be now. And Syria is ill-equipped for counterinsurgency operations. Thus, building an inclusive security and military apparatus is a priority. In this direction, the Syrian Minister of Defense has reached an accord with the majority of the armed factions on forming a unified army. The aim seems to be building a unified professional army composed of volunteers rather than conscripts, while rejecting any sectarian, religious, or regional autonomy for armed groups. Yet, one of the conditions to joining the new Syrian army is attending a Sharia course. The controversial decision led the Ministry of Defense to revise its call by making the course voluntary. However, there is no official statement so far to confirm the revision. Another issue with restructuring the new Syrian army is incorporating foreigner jihadists and promoting some of them into senior positions in recognition of their contribution. In my opinion, either decision must be abandoned, because not only it contradicts with the aim of the new army I just mentioned, but also because building an army for the Ummah, quote unquote, will not resonate well with any destination holding the power of lifting sanctions on Syria. The second challenge is related to the economy. The 13 years long war resulted in 90% of Syrian families living in poverty, while more than 50% are food insecure. Reconstruction-wise, the UN estimates the cost of doing so to be $400 billion, which is almost half of Turkey's GDP. Supposing the geopolitical alignment of New Syria boils down to who provides the best deal over financial aid, trade, energy, or infrastructure development, in that case, the Americans will end up being peripheral actors compared to what Turkey, the Arab Gulf, or even China are willing to offer. I say so because it is unlikely that Trump will expand US economic influence in Syria, and therefore, linking the issue of security to the economy, we are likely to see around Syria the first parameters of what a post American security order might look like. In fact, the reality is already showing signs for such alignment. Take the issue of electricity, for example. Most places in Syria receive about 2 hours of state power each day, and according to a Syrian official, who is the minister of electricity, it will take 1 to 2 months to offer 8 hours of electricity per day and up to 3 years to provide power 24/7. To help with the power needs, Syria is bound to receive 2 electricity generating ships from Turkey and Qatar to boost the energy supplies of Syria. In another example, and while still unconfirmed, I have to say, it is said that Qatar could finance the public sector wages with a monthly price tag of $124 million a month for the 1.2 million workers on the public sector payroll. The third challenge is social cohesion and inclusive participation. The monochromatic caretaker Syrian cabinet is full of bearded men, with one exception, who is called Aisha Al-Dibis, the director of the Women's Affairs Office. While the only woman, her vision for women's role in Syria's future triggered backlash. Responding to a question regarding the space for feminist organizations in Syria's future, she said, the organizations should support the model they are building and would not open space to those who oppose her ideas. Now, while the model is a work in progress, the director of the Women's Affairs Office encouraged educated and experienced women to fill gaps in public institutions, but equally reminded them not to override God-given original disposition or the innate nature of women, which is the role of upbringing in her family. Now, in response of these statements, and for a trailblazing woman role and contribution, Syrian women took to social media and expressed disagreement. And I just want to mention 2 examples here. One woman, for example, she said that we are not sheep in need of a shepherd in response to her statements. And another one said, we have not been arrested and displaced over expressing our opinions for you to come at the end and tell us what and what not to do. And if I am to continue with social cohesion and inclusive participation, one of the loudest questions that immediately emerged in the aftermath of the regime's fall is, and still is, what is the fate of minorities? And I assume the worry at large is about Christians, Kurds, and Alawites. Concerning Christians, I want to share what a friend posted on Facebook because I think this is a very good response to these worries. He said, I do not worry about Christians in Syria from the revolution. I worry about the Christians from those who define us as a sect. Regarding Kurds, personally and professionally, I think it is inexplicable what decades of discriminative and racist Syrian administration did to Kurds in the name of Arabizing policy through a profoundly flawed census in 1962 in the northeast region of Syria. The results of the census accepted some of the Kurds into the Syrian citizenship while leaving others, or the majority of the Kurdish population, with IDs designating their holders as foreign residents in Syria or stateless people in Syria. Obviously, this has to change and revise the legal status of all the Kurds in Syria to become equal citizens in the country. In relation to Alawites, there is anger at them and at times acts of vengeance because they are associated to the atrocities committed by officials of the same sect in the past decades. Obviously, we need to distinguish between the sect and its followers, and the wrongdoing of the Assad regime or the officials of the same sect. And this is only possible through accountability and under the rule of law, which will put an end to the ad hoc acts of violence and vengeance that I am sure that you must have across over social media. And of course, security, economic challenges, and social cohesion and challenges are of a grave nature and lie ahead before Syria's future. And while we have these big concerns and question marks to solve, we cannot expect large-scale repatriation of Syrians. Repatriation to the country of origin after the end of a conflict is not an immediate one-time occasion. If we look at the previous examples of repatriation post end of conflict, we see a pattern in which refugees repatriation happening in peaks, typically in 1 to 3 years after the end of a conflict. And past the peaking period, the pace of repatriation drags, and in some cases, it ceased to happen at all. In a way, a similar trend of repatriation tells us that we take refugees repatriation for granted, which is something to avoid in our policymaking process. And I say so because we assume Syrians will go back to pre-2011 Syria, which is an unrealistic assumption. The reality of the matter is that Syrians who will return, they will do so to a new setting where nothing is similar to what was the situation before 2011. And the prevalence of holistic human security will only drive repatriation in numbers. And I do not need to emphasize that any hosting country of refugees in the region or in Europe should always safeguard the right of repatriation in a voluntary way, because despite the fall of the regime, Syria remains unsafe because of the reasons that I mentioned. I didn't want to extend my notes for too far, so I will stop here. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to the remaining of the webinar and the engagement with the participants. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I assume that will be a lot of questions for you. I have already a lot of them. That because the situation is really interesting in the entire Middle East on this moment, not only in Syria, but in Iraq as well. From this point of view, and you already mentioned, Syria became somehow the battleground of three forces. One is Turkey, the second is Iran, the third is Israel. You can put it which one the first and the last you want, because as we saw on the end of 2024, already the Israeli troops raided some military places in Syria, also threatened Hezbollah and other former Shia militias in Syria. So even we have somehow a sort of a ceasefire, I presume that will be a very long period when this ceasefire will transform in a peaceful state, even that will be an Islamic state as it is on this very moment. We have here in Romania also some rumors, because as you know, during the communism were a lot of people from Syria which were students here, and they have somehow half Romanian families. Some of them are still in Syria, some of them are feel and felt threatened by the new government which came in Damascus, and the Romanian foreign policy and the Romanian consulate, it's very active in order to repatriate some of those people back in Romania. I will change a very little the schedule as we had it, and I will ask Mr. Gyalcinkaya, if I pronounce correctly, to step on the floor, and after that Mr. Danilo from our International Organization for Migration from Romania. Thank you, Mr. Gyalcinkaya. Please.
Thank you, Andrei. I think you can hear me. And also I thank to all organizers for the event, for inviting me as well. And hi to Omar. We have spent a lot of time together in Ankara. My expertise, as I told Alina, is not covering to migration, but instead is about security. So that's why today I am going to address the security implications for Turkey following the fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria. So more or less, this is the idea for me. And over the past decade, the Syrian civil war has significantly impacted Turkey's security landscape, shaping not only our domestic policies, but also our international relations, as expected. To fully understand the challenges Turkey faces in Syria, we must reflect on the lessons learned from our 30-year experience in Iraq from 1990 onwards. So since the Gulf War, Turkey has dealt with PKK terrorism, and especially also it is socio-economic instability stemming from the Iraq's prolonged lack of sovereignty in Baghdad sovereignty. So this history has deeply influenced Turkey's strategic approach to the Syrian conflict. So where every development is viewed through the lens of this hard-earned experience of Turkey. So from border security challenges to the refugee crisis, and previously Turkey was not a target country for refugees before the Syrian civil war. And after the Syrian civil war, not only for Syrians, but also from the old Asian or southern people, Turkey became a refugee target, migration target state. And the rise of extremist groups in Syria during the Syrian civil war. Turkey has faced a multitude of threats emanating from its southern neighbors. So as we now transition into a post-Assad era, new dynamics are emerging. Actually, it's not dynamics. For the time being, we have only hopes. So what we have in our hand, lack of Assad regime, but the substitute of the sovereign power and also military power, which is really essential for state building process, it is also lacking. So there are lots of uncertainties. So some claim for Turkey, there are lots of opportunities. That might be true if you look from the white side, but if you put the black hat on your head, so there are lots of uncertainties and crisis possibilities. So to my understanding, there are lots of issues, but I have just raised a couple of them from the Turkish perspective. And also one should note, before examining the Turkey's position for Syria's security and for Syria's position for Turkey's security, vice versa, one should take into account most of the state building processes are not so successful. So the recent history tells that reality to us. And the second one, the Trump regime in US, we have had lots of indicators that the work with the international order or rule-based international order will be in transition period, because since the Second World War, territorial gain was a kind of taboo. So no one, the base of the international peace and order was lack of non-territorial, existential of the territorial gain. Not only Ukraine or Crimea, but also US claims for Greenland, Canada, and Panama. I think the rest of the world will be open for territorial gains. So it will be a kind of change at international system level. So we are in a transition period. So I put them aside, and then coming to the only regional perspective and Turkey and Syria issue. So the Syrian civil war since 2011 has brought immense challenges to Turkey. So border security. It was, cross-border smuggling and smuggling was not a case before. Previously, it was a kind of border shopping or border trade. But there were lots of terrorist infiltrations, and spillover violence required heightened vigilance and significant military sources for Turkey. And refugee crisis, 3.5 million refugees we have been hosting. And for the last month, according to Minister of Interior, only, as Omar stated, repatriated only 50,000 of them. So in Turkey, the experts on migration tell us that we should expect they will have connections all throughout the period. They will keep their connections with Turkey. It could be a great opportunity for mutual relations in the bright side, but in the darker side, it would be also concern, especially for discussions in harsh domestic political competition in Turkey. And PKK, surely PKK is a big concern for Turkey. As known, PKK rebranded in Syria with new abbreviations by the US CENTCOM to fight against Daesh in the region. So Turkey did differentiate Kurds and PKK in northern Iraq, and for Turkey, again, Turkey can differentiate PKK and Kurds in Syria for the future and for the sake of Syrian peace. There is a room for that only if the US and the CENTCOM get along with these issues, and the Trump administration decision will be decisive, I guess. And vacuum. We have a vacuum in Syria, let's be honest. Not only Israelis' attacks after the fall of Assad to the military assets of Syria, but also Iran and Russia, they are not in the region to some extent in Syria. So the place they were occupying, taking the role in military security, there is a vacuum. So the capacity of the current, let's say, governors or administrators, it is so suspicious. So one can easily expect that balance would be ruined very easily. It might turn another black hole for Syria. So if it happens, that would be very different from the first, hope it's the last, Syrian civil war for Turkey, because in the first one, there were different actors, state actors, Bashar regime, Iran to some extent, and US, and also Russia. But this time, if it happens, Turkey is highly engaged, needs to be highly engaged to Syrian regime, new regime. So it is also a trap for Turkey, needs to take into account. Of course, Daesh terrorism, Turkey had suffered a lot for Daesh terrorism. Turkey is the only NATO member state who fought against Daesh. And for 2 years, between 2014 and 16, we shared a border, 100 kilometers of border with Daesh. Later, Turkey fought against Daesh in the front. So, and Turkey suffered 250 deaths, more than 1,000 wounded people in Turkish soil because of Daesh terrorism. Definitely, Syria and through the refugees and also socio-economical issues are subject of Turkish domestic politics, and also by and large Turkish domestic politics is in a competition, and also it is very controversial for either side, for opponents and for the ruling party, and we have been having lots of elections. For the coming elections, I don't know when, if it's going to be early elections or not, but Syria will be number one issue also. Return of refugees is not the case for the time being. The speeches is very responsible from the current governors in Turkey. And one should take into account decline of Iranian influence and also end of Russian military operations from the dark side or from the bright side. For Turkey, definitely PKK and the place of PKK, and if they are going to be DDR or something like that in the post-conflict state-building process, it is a case, and also it's a case for Kurds in northeastern Syria. So there is a high risk for instability in addition to the current hopeful environment, and also it is not because of the regional issues, but also it is because of international level issues. So in conclusion, Turkey's experience with Iraq over the last 30 decades underscores the importance of proactive and strategic engagement in addressing regional conflicts, while the fall of Assad regime brings hope for a more stable future, it also presents significant challenges and also uncertainties. The record of the world is not brilliant, and also still sanctions are on the place in Syria. So still we are not in the reconstruction period. So Turkey remains committed to safeguarding its borders, protecting citizens, so on and so forth. So let me stop here. So from the security perspective, although we have been looking for the fall of Assad regime, but for the future, we should be so prudent and follow the issue, not regarding the uncertainties. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Yalçankaya. It is really interesting about the situation of Turkey, which is now somehow the last frontier, the last dam between two failed states as Iraq and Syria and the rest of the European Union. So I presume it's a very complicated situation for Turkey as well. And this always and never-ending process of negotiation between Turkey and the European Union on the issue of refugees became somehow the main topic between European Union and Turkey. I understood that around 50,000 Syrians are already came back in Syria, but there are still millions inside of Turkey and the European Union as well. So for the problem of refugees, Syrian refugees, but also from the Middle East and North Africa, mainly Libya refugees, I will ask Mr. Bogdan Danilă to intervene and to step on the floor and explain us what Romania is doing for these people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrei. Firstly, on behalf of IOM, also I'd like to extend our gratitude for this initiative and for inviting us today for the webinar. It is a pleasure to be here with you. Just a slight correction, I'm Romanian, but I'm representing IOM-HQ in Geneva. And to echo what Omar said, I think the international community must unite to address the critical needs for saving lives, for assisting the people in Syria and neighboring countries, and support Syria's path to stability. The Syrian people have faced tremendous hardship with remarkable resilience and courage. Now, we also must match their resilience with solidarity and honor their aspirations by taking concrete actions towards achieving stability. Since I'm going to start with the humanitarian context, Omar already covered part of it. The conditions today for the Syrian people are more dire than even before. Prior to start of the escalation of hostilities on November 27, leading also to the overthrow of Assad's regime, 16.7 million people needed humanitarian assistance across Syria, and 7.4 million people were internally displaced, out of which 2.3 million in camps. OCHA reported over 500,000 IDPs returned to their place of origin since the takeover, but this is out of 1.1 million people displaced following hostilities initiated on 27th of November. So there are over 600,000 newly IDPs beyond November. At the same time, UNHCR estimates 125,000 Syrians have returned to the country since the fall of the Assad government. In addition to ongoing insecurity, Syria is also grappling with a severe economic and humanitarian crisis, increased concerns over financial liquidity, declining public services, including water and electricity. Essential infrastructure, including hospitals and schools, has been destroyed or is dysfunctional in many governorates across the country. So the needs in the countries practically range from basic necessities to the complex task of resuming basic services and rebuilding a shattered society. When it comes to the security context, and I think partially was covered, hostilities and insecurity continue to be across Syria, with incidents over the past week only affecting 8 governorates out of total 14 in the country, resulting also in civilian casualties. Intermittent clashes continue between SNA and SDF forces across northern governorates. while US SDF joint operations in eastern Syria resulted in the capture of an ISIL commander. Caretaker authorities also concluded security operations in Homs city and initiated new operations in Zabadani city targeting former regime affiliates, which also raising some concerns about the treatment of minority communities. At the same time, Israeli forces maintain presence in and beyond the Golan area of separation, with reported incursions affecting villages, in particular in southern Syria. When it comes to the political situation, Omar already mentioned about HTS. Just to add maybe that Al-Shara said that holding elections in Syria could take up to 4 years. Drafting a new constitution could take up to 3 years. I'm not sure why so long for a constitution. As far as I know, there was one already before. And it would take about a year for Syrians to see drastic changes. Haldun also mentioned about the power vacuum in Syria. This has, when it comes to the scenarios, three, I would say, optimistic scenario. Practically the fall of Assad regime provides grounds for cautious optimism, and there is path to stability. There is a pessimistic scenario. Syria descends into chaos due to internal division, external interference, and the lack of centralized authority. And most likely scenario, HTS consolidates power, but still struggles with full legitimacy, internal divisions, and regional discord. Now, each scenario has some assumptions with impacts caused by actions of various actors, either internal developments in Syria, regional dynamics, international engagements, which could affect various aspects in Syria, such as governance, security, access needs, and recovery. Yes, these are the scenarios. This is very indicated, very brief. A little bit about IM in Syria. Historically, we were pushed out of the country by the previous government, in particular due to IM work on collecting data on displacement and humanitarian needs in Syria. IM through displacement tracking metrics, DTM we call it in short, which is currently active in 100 countries, gathers and analyzes data to disseminate critical information on tracking the mobility, vulnerabilities and needs of displaced and mobile populations for informing decision makers and responders in order to provide context-specific assistance. Until 2018, we ran DTM. In Syria, it was called Needs Population Movements, countrywide, and data informed Syria humanitarian response plans, but this was very political sensitive. In 2018, we had to close the IM office in Damascus, and we continued providing aid inside Syria through the UN cross-border operations from Gaziantep in Turkey, which started in 2014 through the UN Security Council resolution. We reached millions since 2014, also for the response to the earthquake which affected Syria in 2023. And I mentioned that because this included also I received in-kind assistance from Romanian government through the EU Civil Protection Mechanism for the response in Syria. When it comes to data collection, the Needs Population Movements was replaced by a Humanitarian Needs Assessment Program, but covering only northwest Syria, and we had to close even that program about 2 years ago. So in general, the data was very sensitive. IM has also played a key role in the health sector in Syria in cooperation with the Global Fund and WHO. For example, we facilitated the establishment of medical oxygen plants in hospitals throughout the country. Amy Pope, IM Director General, visited Syria along with Tom Fletcher, who is the OCHA Emergency Relief Coordinator, and met with the caretaker government and key stakeholders in Syria. And there was a swift approval received from the transitional government on the IM surge and reestablish our presence in Damascus. And it was primarily due to the solid network of contacts stemming from the cross-border work in the northwest. When it comes to the funding situation in Syria, this remains very dire. And here I'm talking about interagency overall response, not just about IM. Only 33% of the 4 billion USD Syria humanitarian response plan for 2024 has been funded. So there is urgent action is needed to address this gap and scale up aid by all agencies. Last week, IAM launched the Flash Appeal, for which we aim to mobilize 73 million over 6 months to assist 1.1 million Syrians inside Syria. The appeal will enable to reestablish a team inside Syria across all key UN hubs. Currently, there are 8 UN hubs in Syria. There are discussions there are going to be 6, but yeah, more to be reinforced. And support displaced communities through conflict-sensitive and localized programming, bridging immediate relief with strategic early recovery initiatives. So IAM is providing multi-sectoral humanitarian assistance in Syria, including protection, WASH, cash assistance, shelter, camp coordination, camp management, and health services. And we are planning to track back again displacement through DTM while working to enhance community resilience and stability among returnees, internally displaced people, IDPs, and host populations. In advancing durable solutions, IAM is planning to create conditions for returns of IDPs by improving access to basic services, strengthening social cohesion, which was already mentioned, which is very critical, and implementing community stabilization initiatives while also providing protection mechanisms, including mental health support, but also needs of legal assistance, housing, land, and property rights support is much needed in Syria, and transitional justice measures aiming also into for reconciliations. The appeal is just for 6 months, and we are working on IAM's broader Syria crisis response plans, which will soon be published. Halden already mentioned about the border. For example, no border governance in place. Currently, visas are issued on a piece of paper when you enter or exit from Syria. And in the context, there is also the need of considering humanitarian border management. By safeguarding fundamental rights, rebuilding trust following years of conflict, and enabling broader programming, and this includes also livelihoods and social cohesion, so looking also into the recovery and development. The idea would be to address immediate recovery needs while promoting conducive environment for peaceful and durable solutions, sustainable returns, and long-term stability for those already displaced by the conflict. And we must consider to establish a really inclusive society, embracing religious minorities, women, and diverse political groups. So this should be at the front of our thinking. There is an expectations of increased mobility from IDP camps to communities, but also returns of Syrians from abroad. These are just highlights where we are expecting more returnees. I'm not going to go in detail. One word about the region. Recognizing the need for long-term solutions, we developed a regional approach to bolster resilience and self-reliance for displaced Syrians and affected communities in Lebanon, Turkey, Jordan, Iraq, and Egypt. This approach complements our humanitarian assistance and aligns with the UN Regional Appeal for the Syria Crisis, which is focusing on 3 key pillars. One is market-driven livelihoods. Second is access to basic services and sustainable local service. And third one is complementary pathways for labor mobility. The approach recognizes the importance of building self-reliance and enabling refugees to build capital and skills to support their return and reintegration and recovery of Syria once conditions are conducive for large voluntary organized returns. Linked to this, for example, the transitional government highlighted in December the need of qualified Syrians to rebuild the country. Programs such as MIDA, which is Migration for Development in Africa, specifically in Somalia, might be a model to be replicated in Syria. The objective of this program is to strengthen the capacity of state institutions through the recruitment of qualified diaspora professionals to contribute towards achieving the goals stipulated in the relevant national development plan and the SDGs. For example, in Somalia, over 800 qualified professionals from the Somali diaspora supported 100 institutions in Somalia. Regional Returns Preparedness Task Force, which is consisting of 12 agencies, has been established. Agencies, I'm talking UN, NGOs, and Red Cross, to determine the regional framework on returns preparedness and support countries that will set up their own return planning. So there are 2 phases are considered. First is spontaneous, and 2 are facilitated returns, with a possible phase 3 promotion of return to be considered in the future. There is acknowledgement of ongoing voluntary spontaneous returns and possible need to support people during that process as number grow. Currently, there is a planning figure that could be up to 1 million next or in this year. But yeah, we have to see. For now, about 35 Syrians have returned from Turkey since the regime's fall. At least these are my figures. So Andrei, maybe you have better ones. For Jordan, almost 30,000, but out of which 5,000 of them are registered with UNHCR as refugees. So again, there are refugees registered with UNHCR, and there are also Syrians abroad who are not registered. So, and the numbers may vary quite a lot. Also from Lebanon, 45,000 Syrians returned. However, when it comes to Lebanon, there is a volatile situation. There are complex cross-border movements. The net movements back to Syria from September to mid-December, when the situation in Lebanon was really bad, was over 200,000, 220,000 Syrians. That was net, because there are entrance and exit. But also it has been noticed a new influx from Syria to Lebanon, also post-Assad. So there is a need of proper analysis. In addition to Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan, large number of Syrian refugees are also in Iraq, Egypt, even in Sudan, another country facing a complex conflict crisis. But also in EU, and Andrei, you already mentioned about Germany in particular, where almost 1 million Syrian nationals are residing. Now, when it comes to EU, where Syrians receive protection under the asylum system, which is based on 1951 Geneva Refugee Convention, Ukrainians, for example, receive temporary protection. Ukrainian refugees in Europe can take short trips home without a change in the protection status. Syrians cannot. There are several legal experts and EU activists who are saying that allowing Syrians in Europe go back for short visits and rebuild their homes without fearing of revocation of their protected status could be an easier way to encourage voluntary returns. Turkey already is the ban, allowing one adult per Syrian family to return after visiting their homeland. And I am also really advocates for the member states on go and see visits, and it should be an enabling environment for informed decisions by Syrians. IM's humanitarian reconstruction recovery programs will include protection assessments as part of the preparation for returns. This includes mapping outside Syria of needs, intention, protection implications for return decisions. And the return and reintegration models have to be adapted to the community-based approaches that support reconstruction and recovery, and for the benefit of returning refugees, IDPs, and
ben Profesör Doktor Hüseyin
communities.
Bağcı. Nasıl? Evet. Misafirimiz yarın normal şeyle gelecek. Yani programda değişiklik olmayacak. Gelecek.
Next slide, please.
Yarın
I'm
oradan
almost
sonra görüşürüz.
finished.
Hadi.
Please, Mr. Hussein Bakci, if you are so kind to close your micro, please.
For short term, first of all, we are starting with the data collection in Syria to help assess conditions in key areas of return, and also in host countries to help assess return intentions to inform the designing. Again, we want to go for the entire package, which means pre-departure screening, return counseling, medical health, psychosocial support if is needed, movement facilitation, post-arrival assistance, and if possible, even reintegration assistance. We are planning to collaborate with Turkey and the other relevant countries to help support government-led protocols on exit procedures, needed legal identity documents, information exchange between the countries, transit, border, and customs controls, which already were mentioned. Data, there are some programmatic opportunities, but only when conditions allow. Again, going back to the data collection and assessments, return intentions, also analysis of conditions in key return areas and protection assessments. When conditions permit, scale up the AVRR, Assisted Voluntary Return and Reintegration programs in cooperation with the humanitarian recovery and reconstruction efforts. And yeah, this is, again, is not just IOM, so we should work in partnership. Reintegration efforts in Syria must support both individuals and also their communities as part of the recovery and reconstruction context. So we are looking into an area-based approach linked to specific communities with conditions for return, where reintegration will be collectively provided together with local authorities. And again, social cohesion, which was already mentioned, is key. Support new authorities with return migration management. And there are various global good practices on rights-based, safe and dignified returns, readmission, reintegration. In coordination with UNHCR, organize voluntary repatriation, which is one of the traditional durable solutions for the refugees. Provide technical guidance to host countries as they develop their own voluntary return plans. And that we are thinking also about information, counseling packages, and reintegration assistance, capacity development and support for protection system in Syria, and linking diaspora with recovery efforts. That was my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Danilo. Thank you very much about, first of all, the implication of IOM into the field, because I assume this is the most important thing that the United Nations made in the last 10 years, just solving the problems of new fires and wars and conflicts which appears all around the world, and mainly in the Middle East and North Africa. We have another two colleagues of ours, Fatma Yilmaz and Claudiu Crăciun. Fatma, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for the invitation and for paying specific attention to gender issues during this meeting, more specifically to the situation of women in Syria. I would like to make a few observations that I consider important, and why I also believe it's important to pay special attention to women issue. It is not my intention to minimize the suffering of men or other vulnerable groups. It is redundant to mention that both during wars and after they end, the category of people who suffer the most are women and children. Just look at Afghanistan, Iraq, Ukraine, Gaza. The victims are women and children. I will not say about any number of dead women or children. Before, many years ago, when I was working with some Syrian women in refugee camps, one of them, she asked me, what are you doing with these data collections? It's very important, data collections. And I said that it's for a research project. And she looked into my eyes and she told me, we are just a number. So it's my kind of solidarity and in the same time of protest, because when we are talking about this kind of problems, we use all the time numbers. And I would like kindly to ask you to remember that every number of this war, of this conflict, has a name and has a soul. And no, they are not just numbers. Time is very short. I will focus on highlighting the problems that feminist organizations, and not only feminist ones, also they are dealing with human rights, are reporting. On the one hand, we have several million Syrian women who in recent years have gone into exile. But in the same time, we have the predominant narrative about the situation of Syrian women refugee also in Turkey. Is one that talks about the Turkish state concern for this woman, but we know that in reality, Syrian women have endured humiliation and very difficult situation there and their children. The same situation is for Europe, while all the analysts talk about and use the stereotypes about Syrian refugees, very few analyses and even the attention of European institutions, I think, is weak towards the specific situation of Syrian women. We cannot say that their integration in European society has been successful. But I will not talk about the situation of Syrian refugee women. This issue would deserve a separate session. But many of these women are returning to their country. They are joining the women who remained in Syria and who have resisted the Assad regime. It is important to mention that Syrian women are not a homogeneous group. We do not have a monolith. Women can be secular or religious. They can belong to many minorities in Syria, both religious and ethnic. Syria is an ethnic and religious mosaic. They are very diverse, and when we have an overall picture, these specificities should not be forgotten. I would like to make a parenthesis here before moving on the gender issue. The installation of an Islamist government in Syria, because I saw many analysis also in journals and in social media that we talk about controversial regime, or I don't know, about light Islamist regime. No, we are not talking about a light Islamist regime. We are talking about fundamentalist past of Mr. Golani. And this is another problem. After the Assad regime has opened a Pandora box, forcing the country to confront long suppressed issues that must now be addressed. All these groups, vulnerable groups, they faced with a very big a problem. And I would like to talk a little bit about specific problem for women in Syria. Everybody talks about the future of democratic regime. I say the word democratic, but I will say another word. Islam, Sunni Islam. The majority population is Sunni in Syria. And from the latest analysis, the Salafi current is the most widespread. But when you say Salafism, you are already saying a dangerous word for the status of women, because the Salafi ideology is one of the most fundamentalist that very seriously attacks the rights and freedoms of women. So if during the war years, Syrian women practically supported the existence of their familiars because the man was in the war, they stayed at home and work, and they are very important in the future for the economy of Syria. I would like not to overlook the exceptional activity of some very brave women activists for human rights. I would like to remember, for example, the Noura Al-Jizawi, who started her activity in university in the early 2000s through protest against honor killings. In shortly, the big problem for the status of women now in Syria is honor killings, forced marriages, access to abortion, divorce, domestic violence, women access to decision-making positions, and also freedom of thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fatma. Thank you very much about taking care about the time. I will ask also our colleague Claudiu Crăciun to step on the floor and to tell us some thoughts of him about the reconstruction of Syria, which will be probably a very complicated issue because we have to reconstruct pretty much the entire Middle East, not only Syria. Thank you, Claude.
True enough. Thank you, Andrei. Thank you very much. And it was a pleasure to hear all the presentations before, and there was so much to learn out of them, and I'm happy to be here contributing. This is a reflection based on my own previous research. I was looking in my PhD years a long time ago at the process of state building and regime building, especially in countries which experience issues and troubles with sovereignty and state capacity, especially after conflict. So my reflections are based on that. So I would just briefly point out that there are three avenues not only for research, but also for construction or reconstruction. And let me tell you beforehand, I'm thinking about a political reconstruction. And I do admit that all the dimensions mentioned there, for example, administrative, economic, all those issues are very important. But for me, and of course, I'm a political scientist, so what else can I tell? The very essence of stability is the political process, is the political community, how it is defined, and how the political process is managed. So let me briefly reflect on that. And we have three main areas. First is the state, the second is the regime, and the third is the parties. And just briefly, I think for new constitution, 3 years is an awful long time. Because as we saw in the cases of Central and Eastern European states, as long as you had a process prolonged for the constitution drafting, real politics, real event politics happened and basically kind of defined the power structure before the constitution. So let's bear in mind this example, and it would be great if a constitutional assembly with all the leaders and the communities that have to be at the table, it's fastly convened as to have a process and a swift resolution of this constitutional affair, which is, I think, that the centerpiece of the stability of the regime and also of the trust of the international community into the new state. I mean, if you don't have a constitution which is accepted and it's a democratic one, well, what else can you expect? So regarding the state, there is a big question whether the new state will be unitary or federal. And there are already preferences which are not aligned. For example, the Kurds are saying that a federal system, and of course we know that there are several models of federal systems around, even confederal, they would like to have some kind of autonomy recognized by the constitution, and that autonomy to be filled with real political authority. I'm not familiar with any advanced plans in regarding to the federal formula that they're putting forward, but I think it's safe to say for now that we have a choice between a unitary and a federal system, and a whole negotiation taking place there. Second, regime. What kind of political regime will it be? Well, here on the basis of history, we know that presidential systems tend to be abused. The power within the presidential systems tend to be abused. And this is something that we should bear in mind. From the research on regimes, we also know that presidential systems are also prone to instability, because especially in fragmented and diverse societies, it's very difficult for one person to, let's say, embody and represent everyone. And sooner or later, there will be a tendency to have this very high office belonging or, to a certain group, a certain political group, the dominant one, where the others are feeling marginalized. So, and also I would add to that usually during insurrections or rebellions, you have a military hierarchy built that could be transferred to the political one. And this is complicated because basically we have an insurgent group, HTS, which tries to become the new regime somehow, or is the backbone of the new regime. And that leads to the next question, the political parties. Will HTS become a political party? What kind of political party will it be? Will it abandon its military branch? Will it create a parallel system of public service provisions like Hezbollah? I'm thinking about that. Will it just be a nice, playing by the rule political party who accepts also defeat? Because if it doesn't accept defeat in elections, then it is not a democratic actor. And then, of course, there is a big question whether Syria can be truly a democratic state, even though it enjoyed maybe some stability prior to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Claudio. It's really interesting. But the real question, if will Syria or Iraq will exist anymore after those war, because the territory is totally scattered between all those groups, Christian, Muslims, Sunni, Shia, Kurds, and so on and so forth. Thank you very much, everybody. We have only 7, but I assume that Wana will accept to give us few other minutes. I propose to take only 5 questions from the entire group. Who is I refrain myself. I have a lot of questions, but want to put some questions, mainly the students, if they are with us.
So I wanted to ask if you think that international instability, like with Israel bombings and Russian-Ukrainian war and the national instability of Syria right now, do you think there's a chance of it becoming a dictatorship again or being invaded by other forces? Like, what do you think about this?
I will ask Mr. Yalchinkaya to respond. He's the closer one to this topic. Thank you very much. Somebody else?
I may, maybe, if possible.
Yes, sure, please. Who the question for?
For Fatima.
For
Fatima. Fatima was actually addressing a very interesting social, psychological issue, women and the diversity of the Syrian society. And she indicated actually those who are now in power, they have a very difficult background coming from very radical groups. The question is this, Fatima. Do you think that one shouldn't give them any chance that they can change? Or do you think that radicals would never change, even if there are a lot of pressure from outside, not only from Turkey, but from the West, from America, from China? Don't you think that those who come to power would be much more realistic and pragmatic rather than ideological? In one point, I'm 100% with you. The women suffered the most of this situation. We are on the same page with this. But what is your solution? What would you suggest to improve the conditions to the government there, to the West, and to the global South, not only to the West, but also to China, Brazil, African countries, etc. What would you suggest? What are your proposals?
For answer to this question, we have to have another meeting. Thank you very much. I will ask Yalchinkaya and Fatma to respond to that questions.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you for the question. Actually, that's a very good question. And also it is highly connected to my concern, because no matter what happens at regional or state level, at the international level highly affects the regional issues and state level issues. And unfortunately, regarding the last issues, I would say beginning from the annexation of Crimea 2014, and also later 2022 Ukraine war, and later Gaza issue, and also what happens in Gaza, lack of territory from Palestinians. Not only they lose their lives, but also they lose their territories. And also last claims of, as I mentioned during my talk, last claims of Trump administration from territorial gain. I would say, although I'm working on war issues, so it is occupational hazard. So I would say the future is not so promising. So even all these concerns, my concerns result in unstable international environment. Unfortunately, the best option in Syria would be dictatorship. I am not promoting dictatorship. I'm promoting stability and consistency for the lives, and it would turn to turmoil, also black hole for the international system, and nobody would care about the issue because the rest of the world would be in a bad situation. Actually, history tells us, and also the real concern is could be end of liberal or rule-based international order. So the rest of the world, the improved developments in the rest of the world will definitely affect the issue in Syria. And number one issue to establish sovereignty and state apparatus, keep the state apparatus in Syria, and then it would pave a way to human security, which really matters. Thank you very much for your question. I think you raised your point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Fatma, if you are so kind.
Thank you very much for your question. I will start from here. You said that the new leader has a difficult past. I will not use the word difficult. The new leader has a fundamentalist past for me. And this is my personal opinion. Yes, I don't trust in this kind of political leaders who take the religion and in the public space. Never. I don't trust, but this is my personal opinion. I don't have miraculous solution for what will happen with Syria in the future. But I would like to remember something about the new political leader. We do not have much information about how the new political leader thinks about the status of women in the new society. But we can look at some of his deeds, some deeds that do not contain words, but that convey a very strong symbolism with a very strong message. And I would like to remember Golani's meeting with the French and German foreign ministers. The refusal to shake hands reminded us of how Salafist ideology see the position of women in society. And he sent a very clear message to the international community. So I'm sorry, but I don't trust in this kind of leader.
Mr. Katko, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. This is just a following remark on Professor Zbaji's question to relation of women and how to deal with them, and for the concerns that Fatma raised. These are definitely legitimate concerns, but I mean, it's been just 5 weeks since the old regime has been toppled, and we are assuming that the old quote unquote secular regime was so good to women, and that was not true. But we obviously intentionally, I assume, or unintentionally, we omit the atrocities that the old regime committed against women who rebelled against him since 2011. We have thousands of women who have been held in detention, raped countless times, and forced to give birth to children in prisons for the last 13 years, all in the name of fighting terrorism. So if we are putting the new de facto leader, which I cannot designate an official capacity to him or to his fellows because they don't have legitimacy yet in that sense, we need also to bring a balanced discussion as well, because women also suffered for the last 13 years at the hands of the old regime that was portrayed and applauded by many in Turkey and in Europe to be secular, fighting terrorists. That was not the case. So I just wish that, to have that sort of view in our discussions when we bring up the issue of whether he shook the hand of the German foreign minister or not, and what that means to the fate and participation of women. That's my only follow-up remark for this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There were many questions on the chat, but unfortunately we already overlapped the schedule. I think we can, if the subject will be once again flows up and pops up, because what has happened in the Middle East always is very interesting. Probably we can make 2 months from now another meeting, and we are going to ask the same participants to join us. Thank you very much, everybody. It was a pleasure to moderate this session, and hope we'll meet again. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.